bandits are also threatening the contractors that we sent to fix it, which is why we sought help of the NSA and the other security agencies. So, with due respect to the Senator, the northern blackout was not due to technical grid collapse. It was vandalization. And we have explored alternative routes of supplying power, which is the Bauchi route, which was also vandalized anyway, but that one is easier to fix. And we are saying within the next 2 to 3 days, there will be light restored to the north.
Troubling revelations made there by the Minister of Power, Mr. Adebayo Adelabu, and even though power has been restored to many parts of the north now, the worrying question is, how will this be prevented from happening again, such that economic activities and indeed, the simplest aspect of national life is not disrupted yet again in the north? And joining us to have this conversation this morning, we have very distinguished gentlemen, 2 of them joining us from our Abuja studio. We have this morning Mr. Onyekachi Adekoya, 2 joining us in our Lagos studio. I beg your pardon. Mr. Onyekachi Adekoya, a security expert who joins us here in Lagos. We also have Mr. Dixon Osaji, is also a security consultant who joins us here in Lagos. And joining us from our Abuja studio, we have former Commissioner of Police, Mr. Emmanuel Ojukwu, retired, who joins us from our Abuja studio. I'll start here in Lagos. Mr. Adekoya, I'll start with you. Is this another approach? We know the usual approach of insurgents. They go after soft targets, the locals. In fact, reports are to the effect that they, try to gain the trust of the locals through recruitment and even paying them, some form of money. Sometimes they obtain taxes from them. But this is another approach. And how worrying is this for you?
Good morning to the viewers. This is nothing new, really. Again, I'm always surprised when Nigerians are surprised because we don't look at the data. There's been a couple of attacks on transmission lines, even into the FCT. I think in the last 10 years it's happened. A place like the Northeast is their everyday experience. If you look at Maiduguri as a garrison town now, Borno State, as a matter of fact, completely disconnected from the grid. And they've been in that situation, if I'm not mistaken, in the last 6 years. So what Maiduguri has tried to do is to have an IPP and a gas-powered plant within Maiduguri itself, and then they truck gas into Maiduguri. So I don't think the minister has said this is a new revelation. I would be surprised if that's what he's saying. 1, 2, I would also be surprised if they've not taken cognizance of this risk. These matters have been there. So the thing is, what is the program? I heard him mention the NSA. Yes, the NSA coordinates. Again, we overflog the office of the NSA. The NSA is not everybody's lapdog, as it were, with profound respect. The NSA is to coordinate the intelligence agencies. So yes, if he's referring to the NSA to provide intelligence and also maybe put more focus on those communities, because these issues happen within the communities. These things are done by Nigerians, not by outsiders. The same program you put in place to protect pipelines are the same programs you put in place to protect these critical national assets. So there's a way to do the protection. It's not hard, but it's just attention and resources. So we don't know if the right program is in place, if the security department of the TCN have the required resources to do their job. Because along the lines where these power transmission cables are running, they run through communities. There are community people involved in this. So you just follow the right of way of the lines and then know where this is happening frequently. And then you address it. And then you know the outer area. So, like I said, I'm surprised that Nigerians are surprised. But I'm not surprised, because this has been happening for the last 10 years, repeatedly in different parts of the North Central, Northeast, sometimes in the Northwest. So it's not new.
You're right, Mr. Adekoya, because there are some reports that quoting locals to say that the vandals have actually been attacking the Shiroro Kaduna transmission lines for a long time.
Yes.
So, Mr. Osagie, how do they even access? These are critical national assets. How do they even take possession of it in the first place, to the extent that officials who are supposed to work on those power lines are unable to access them without the aid of other security operatives?
Well, fantastic question. That is the absence of a capable guardian, you know. In every given situation, I think things should be put in place. We're talking about critical infrastructure here. And when you want to talk about protecting critical infrastructure, you first of all put the the Nigerian people in mind, you know, understanding the fact that this critical infrastructure contributes to our national development. And first of all, we need to also understand the objectives of most of these terrorist groups. Why are they targeting most of this critical infrastructure? You know, they want to get global recognition, which they are getting. They want to have publicity, which they are getting, because publicity makes them strive. Publicity gives them energy. These guys breathe evil. They live evil. They dream evil. They eat evil. They sleep evil. So if these guys are not well, you know, curtailed, they will keep on attacking our critical infrastructure. Just like Achi said, security is doable. You know, it's just that it's so sad that our reputational capital as a country has been damaged and has been brutalized for so long by this unnecessary human being classified as a bandit or whatever. But I see them as terrorists. The Senate Vice President yesterday, you know, attests to the fact that, yes, we are yet as a country to live with terrorists. He has accepted that we are living with terrorist group in our nation, in our territorial space, whereby the people of Nigeria that were supposed to be taken care of by the Constitution of the Republic of Nigeria are being abused, brutalized by these terrorist groups. So these guys, they live with us, they have captured our assets, and we need not give them the breathing space. We need to go after these guys with speed and momentum, go after their sponsors as well, because I saw the Minister of Power yesterday, he's been worried, you know, the transmission company, we have the generation company, we have the transmission company, and we have the distribution company. But I want to appreciate the TCN response to, you know, this restoring electricity within the northern region. It's a disturbing development for our national security. Indeed,
it is. Mr. Juku, let's come to you now. The minister said even the Bauchi-Makurdi transmission line was also attacked, but he acknowledged that it was easier to repair. You are a retired commissioner of police. Give us a sense of what is usually the security, the kind of security formation around those assets, and how it may have been breached.
Okay, thank you for having me. First is that I'm happy that the lines have been restored in some parts, and, but there's no guarantee that those communities will have lights, say, in the next 3 days. Or thereafter, because those facilities can also be vandalized again and again. What I think, what has been the situation has been that the police and other security agencies, particularly the Nigerian Security and Civil Defense Corps, have been working in sync to protect those trophy institutions. But I think we need to go a step further, apart from the security agencies working along that line. Those responsible, this TCN or whoever generates and transmits electricity, ought to do a stakeholder mapping and then stakeholder engagement. Who are the stakeholders in electricity distribution chain? Who are the consumers? They know them. Need to segment them, engage them. Every Nigerian who lives along that line depends one way or the other on this electricity. It's a stakeholder. We need to engage these stakeholders and let them have an understanding. At any time a bolt or a knot is removed from a transmission line, it poses grave danger to farmers, poses great danger to the agricultural food chain, it poses danger to hunters, it poses danger to the communities around. They could spark fire. These wires may collapse, these towers may collapse, and bring about fire. Nobody likes all these things. So they need to be put on notice, they need to mobilize to help the government to police these institutions. Now, when these bolts and nuts are removed or the wires are cut, there are receivers. So that stakeholder mapping will show us who are the benefactors, who are those triggering this issue, who are those sponsoring these boys to do all that, and then who are the end users, who are the receivers of these stolen items. By the time we're able to get all of these, we'll be able to break the chain, the link between the benefactor and the beneficiary, the thief, and then the receiver of stolen property. It has to be a community arrangement, not just for the police or other agencies. All hands have to be on deck, because when it happens, everybody smells it, everybody suffers. So everybody must be involved in securing our infrastructure. Apart from that, there could be technical aid to put a surveillance on this infrastructure. I'm sure they can devise that, and I'm sure they do exist elsewhere in the world, and Nigeria has got the capacity to look into that.
Let me bring it back to you, Mr. Adekoya. He is talking about some level of collaboration. Mr. Sajay talks about, if I quote him correctly, maybe brute force. Where do you stand on this? Because these guys, the way where I sit, I see them is an affront on our national sovereignty.
Yes.
So what approach is best for you?
For me, it's not a national problem. Again, we thank God that the laws have been reworked to allow state governments, I like to come back to state governments, to be able to generate their own power and distribute it locally. So we need to go there very quickly. You can't have lines running that far across very austere parts and there's nobody monitoring it. So that's on the one hand for the future. The second part is that this is the problem of the TCN, not of Nigerians, as it were. There's a company called the Transmission Company of Nigeria. If you look at the oil and gas, let's also mirror, because it's almost the same thing. You have these lines, you have the right of way running. We have local operators within the oil and gas space who are able to move and have about 96%, 97% uptime in their pipelines. And what they do is what the CP said. You do your stakeholder mapping. You know where your lines are passing through, and you manage the communities along those lines. There's some incentivization they have to provide. There is some layering of force that has to be provided also, because if you have a program, you don't have enforcement, you have nothing. So for me, this is a failure on the part of the TCN. We should be hearing from the CEO or the head of the TCN. It's a TCN failure. They collect money for transmission. Part of which they also do is to guarantee the discos, that distribution. I know they may have different clauses to also excuse them from force majeure, some of these things. But if you run a company like the TCN, at the heart of your operation is security. So what's the enterprise security risk program of the TCN? At the TCN, do you have a director of security? What is his team like? What program are they running? What resources do they have? Because TCN goes across the country. So who are the subheads? Who is managing what? Whose area is failing? What is the risk assessment done across the lines in the last, say, 1 year? What were the recommendations made? Is anybody following those recommendations? So we can cry bandits all we want, but there's a company responsible, and that company should come and answer. That's where I stand, because there are companies in Nigeria that are able to. Again, let me reference the oil and gas. The presidency has said, listen, every operator, IOC or local, we must up production. So what everybody is doing in that sector is going back to looking at their system, to seeing what is working, what is not working, what can be improved upon, because we want to ramp up production. The same thing in the power sector. Nobody's interested in all this. We've seen in Nigeria where pipelines are sabotaged because, turnaround maintenance is an industry on its own. The president should give a matching order. All we want is to up transmission, we want to up generation, we want Nigerians to receive more power.
Mr.
That company must do its job.
But pardon me, are you saying that the TCN should be responsible for security around the national assets and should guarantee it as well?
Absolutely. That's why it's the TCN. The TCN would have a security department. If they don't have, that's a big problem. You see, what the CP was talking about, stakeholder mapping, that's the very basic thing any company with a national outlook does. When your network or whatever your operation crisscrosses different parts. Nigeria has over 774 local governments. So you need to know where your key risk is. You need to grade your security operating level to say, at this region, I'm at level 4, at this region, I'm at level 2, at level 4, I'm grading from 1 to 5. If 4 being high risk, 5 being extreme risk. So when you grade, you know where you should be paying attention to and what resources should be going into those communities to manage the stakeholders to, I mean, we talk about asset owners sometimes in the oil and gas space. You see, these attacks on the lines have been repeated.
All right, Mr. Adeka, let me take you to Mr. Saja. I like to go back to promises politicians make, because that's the only way I can hold them accountable.
Political promises, yeah.
The 80-page mandate or the manifesto of the president, there's under security, we have what they call secure critical national infrastructure. I want to read a line where they talked about how to protect all of this. Integral to this effort shall be the deployment of modern technologies, tools, and equipment to end crude oil theft, prevent vandalization of national assets, and reduce to the barest minimum environmental pollution to Niger Delta and all of that. So we can hold the president accountable. I know that he wants to excuse the government to an extent.
In no way excusing the government.
No, I understand what you're saying, that TCN is their job, just like the telcos have responsibility to their own asset.
Correct.
Where do you start? I know you're from the military, so force is important to you. But on this particular one, how much of technology can we deploy and what sort of technology? Because these things are available. Why are we behaving like this is rocket science? We can't even generate up to 10,000. And there are cities that are generating 40,000 and they don't have all this vandalism. So what are we not looking at?
Well, fantastic question, Jeffrey. You see, security in totality is the freedom from danger, freedom from loss, and the essence, the goal of security is to go after the loss, go before the loss. When you go after the loss, security has been defeated, and that is why we've been suffering attacks from most of these criminal elements because of the opportunity. Because when you look at the triangle of crime, 3 factors are responsible: a motivated offender, the opportunity, then the object itself. Now, most of these criminal elements, they are piercing through the opportunity. And what do? We need to cut off such criminal opportunity. That's where crime mapping analysis comes to play. Like my colleague rightly said, most times people don't listen. When an incident happened, for example, in Sokoto State, I think it's right time for the security guys in Kaduna State to say, hey, what lessons do we draw from the incident that transpired in Sokoto State? So here in our own country, we just go to bed whenever an incident happens, and we are okay waiting for the next strike. And this guy strikes again. We wait for the next strike. They keep on striking. So for me, I think the area of the northern area is a security, it's a high risk area, and the TCN, like I rightly talked about, are solely responsible in protecting their own facility, but with the aid of the federal government, because they don't have an armed wing or a military wing or a policing wing in their security design. They just need to feed the security agent with what they have come up with, because the security agent will not go and carry out crime mapping analysis for them, ascertain the threat level, the risk level of their own facility. So it is their own duty to say, hey, let's look at Zamfara, for example. It's a high risk area, bandits everywhere. Is there possibility for an attack in our critical asset? If the answer is yes, okay, what do we do? That's where security management processes comes to play, because it's not all about the people. Security management has to do with the people, the processes, and the technology, like you rightly quoted there. The essence of technology. People think that sometimes technology is just for fashion. No, technology is to curtail crime in progress. If, for example, there's a crime in progress, like when the facility were blown off, it's a crime during the crime in progress. If there was an alert to the security agent to inform them, having carried out an area view to ascertain the crime in progress, inform them that there's a crime in progress, what then happened? The security guys go there and they fetch these guys. But these 3 processes fail. The people factor fail, the processes fail, and the technological factor fail. So that tells you that we're not ready.
Let me take it to Mr. Ojukwu. Mr. Adeka, I'll come back to you at some point. It beats me, confuses me even sometimes. Let me give you an example. For instance, oil is our greatest cash cow. It accounts for over 70% of our foreign earnings. Mr. Ojukwu, this is for you. But we can't ramp up production. That is within our control. We can't control prices, but we can control production. We can't. We don't have enough power. And yet, vandals are destroying the small one we have. I feel like there should be some level of, they've abused the word, maybe a state of emergency to make sure this is protected. Should we begin to think of what was adopted by the Yar'Adua government with the issue of Niger Delta, to say some of these repentant terrorists, Boko Haram, should we repurpose them to begin to protect these things? Is that the way we should go? Because I'm just thinking of what can be done to stop this.
Yeah. Thank you. There should be citizen involvement in policing, whether of normal access or such critical access as we do have, along transmission or even in oil. There's a duty for the National Orientation Agency to desensitize Nigerians from being unpatriotic. Some Nigerians are disloyal to this country. Some are hurting for one reason or the other. Government will reach out to them and bring out the hearts. We need to speak to their sentiments and to their emotions. And let them have an understanding that when Nigeria goes down, they go down even with their animosity or with their grievances. The government must also bring out the olive branch and make peace. The anchor you mentioned, Niger Delta militants, yes, they were hurting, they were gripped, one reason or the other, they were in the creeks and making life unbearable for the oil explorers, making life unbearable for Nigeria, and putting our name on this bad side of history, the bad side of the map of terrorism. Government reached out to them. There are also vandals even today, and there are vandals tomorrow. Government has to devise a means to be proactive. Reach out to those who may be hurting tomorrow, who are hurting today. Heal wounds. Never tell somebody cannot do anything. If he removes a knot, a bolt, he had done something, even to himself and to the rest of us. So I'm thinking about getting the citizens mobilized, remobilized, reoriented towards nationalism, towards national safety and security. The people must be involved. We need to reach out to the people, talk to them, to play along with everybody so that we can live in peace and in safety. Jackboot policing may not work because there will always be saboteurs. Let us reach out to them, appeal to them to be on the same page with the pace of development Nigeria wants to attain.
Mr. Ojukwu is talking about the carrot approach, but I'd like to look at accountability, and I'm going to piggyback on what you said earlier, Mr. Onyekachi, that the TCN should guarantee security and take responsibility for security in its national assets. Yeah. But Mr. Osagie responded by saying that there's no military wing at the TCN, and we have the armed forces that defend our territorial integrity and has even intervened in issues of domestic security at home. So we should be asking questions of that department in the forces that should be taking responsibility of security. I imagine if, for instance, you know, at the villa, the people in charge of security abdicate, heads should roll. So who should we be asking questions of about the breach of security, continuing breach as it is, at our critical national assets? And we could also refer to the reports of takeover of the military training camp in Niger State, which the army has, you know, denied anyway, but we hope that it doesn't happen again. Mr. Onyekachi.
Yeah, so I'd like for us to compare apples with apples. That case of the military training camp has a national outlook to it. I would have to insist that this issue, in terms of accountability, I would love to see the House, not all these interesting things we see, set up an inquiry. The House should set up an inquiry into this matter. Invite TCN. We don't need to hear from the Minister of Power. Invite the TCN. We need to know who are the security consultants or enterprise risk consultants to the TCN.
What about the Minister of Defense?
I'm coming. We need to know the security company they are working with. Are they licensed? Are they even, do they know what they are doing? We need to know what reports they've put before the government. Because for us to absorb the TCN, we need to see what they have done internally to ensure the protection of this line and show us where the government is failing on its part. Because people, we can't at every turn claim that the government has failed. The case Dixon was making the point is that you hear me talk about security as a program, not being a one-off. There's a system to security. I am the facility or the asset owner. I need government support on this end. I've run this program, I've run that program, but the government is failing to impute at this end. So that commission of inquiry will show us what the challenges are and who is failing at what. So do a commission of inquiry, invite the TCN to come. Let the TCN tell us that they wrote to the police did not give them men. Let the TCN be the one to tell us that they wrote to the military did not supply personnel. You will be surprised when an inquiry comes in. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because we do a lot of enterprise risk consulting and advisory to organizations. And I would always say that for you to know an organization that is serious with security, look at the organogram of that organization. So I want to see the organogram of the TCN. You talked about the oil supply. Why can't we ramp up supply? Production. You will be amazed the conversations that we are having in some of these organizations. I give an example. The IOCs should have no business whatsoever with pipelines in Nigeria because the locals have been proven to manage the pipelines better. Let me give an example. Maybe there's a TPP pipeline running somewhere, operated by Shell. Shell has so many things like voluntary principles, international considerations and everything. You know, you have policemen sitting manning those pipelines, soldiers manning the pipelines, and they cannot shoot at sight. All right. So there are a number of issues, really, you know, that if we do not x-ray properly, bring the parties. The CP talked about stakeholder mapping. TCN is a stakeholder in this matter. Invite the TCN. Has anybody invited the head of TCN so far?
Let's bring it to Mr. Saji. So he's talking about, he really wants the company to be held accountable. What additional thing can be done? Let's move forward now. Because
I'd like to hear from them.
As you said, it's almost predictable. I know for a fact that the grid will collapse again. It's not a prophecy because we know the problem. It has not been resolved.
Is it a prayer point?
Yeah?
Is it a prayer point if not prophecy?
I'm saying the grid will collapse again. Quote me on it. Because the fixing has not been done. So we're just managing it. So we should not expect a miracle soon. It's almost predictable that vandals will strike again. What can we do to at least reduce it? That question is for you, Saji, and the CP as well.
Fantastic question. My company, I was able to train about 6,000 staffs of KEDCO between 2016 and 2019 in the area of vandalism. And I think the company did so well in training their staff in management of critical infrastructure. And one of the problems posed by most of the staffs of KEDCO was, abuse by most of these vandals and, lack of protection facility. When you carry out protection strategy, don't make it easy for these criminals to get into your asset. That is why you need to allow them to labor in vain. That is what security is all about. Laboring in vain is that before they get into that asset, they must pass through some ring of protection. For example, before I got in here, Jeffrey, the security here is very, very awesome. I passed through the gate, passed through somewhere, got in here, passed through almost 2 to 3 doors before I got in here. We call it security, it's defense in depth. So for me, I will advise the TCN to, invest more on training of their staffs and management and their security team, like Kachi rightly said, because they should be held accountable. What advice are they giving the security agent to protect their assets? So when they invest in training, then they'll be able to go before the laws. They'll be able to assess and forecast. You just forecasted a crime, a would-be crime. So let them carry out such forecast.
It's technical failure.
Yes, technical failure. Okay, technical failure, that means that is not a crime. Yeah. So for me, what has happened is not a technical failure. It is a crime against the Nigerian critical infrastructure. So the TCN has a lot to do. They should, call up their security director to give them brief and carry out a general assessment of all their facility and ascertain the porosity and the vulnerable areas so that they will project more security factors within that vulnerable areas.
CP?
Yes, thank you. I was tempted to say amen to your prayer, but I'm not going to pray. I do know, of course, that the grid will collapse again. I saw in the records I collapsed over 105 times in the last 10 years. Yeah. So chances of collapse are there due to vandalism or due to inefficiency here and there. Yeah. But something has to be done to minimize vandalism of these trophy assets. One way to do it is, as we mentioned earlier, is about citizen involvement. Number 2 is about putting some measures, making the targets a little hardened by having areas to deter people from entering the place. Reduce the speed or the ease with which they can access these assets, climb the mast and bring everything down. How far can deny them access to that? In addition, if you have technology aiding the surveillance of these things, we'll be able to detect when this is about to be done, and if it's done, to be able to arrest the perpetrators immediately and take them to court. I've not seen where a vandal was taken to court, tried and convicted. We've seen a number of them who were electrocuted in the process, and we say good riddance to bad rubbish. But they'll repeat. Let somebody be properly prosecuted, sent to jail, because impunity keeps happening when those who are around fail to do what they ought to do to bring perpetrators to book. I think somebody should be in the jailhouse for doing that. And also, the TCN should be held accountable. They have a responsibility given to them by Nigeria to ensure transmission of generated electricity. We don't have enough generated, the one generated cannot be transmitted, and somebody is sitting down somewhere cozily. No. Somebody should be held to account for that.
Indeed. There are some operative words that I've taken from this conversation. Make them labor in vain, and of course invite the TCN.
TCN.
To answer TCN. Questions on accountability.
We invite them.
So we must touch down at this point, and thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming through for us on this conversation. We've been speaking with Mr. Onyekachi Adekoya, security expert, and Mr. Dixon Osagie, security consultant. Both men joined us here in our Lagos studio. And, of course, retired CP Emmanuel Ojukwu. Thank you so much for your time, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And from here, we move on to Rivers State, where we look at the implications of that court order on the CBN to stop releasing allocation further to Rivers State government. We'll be right back after this time out. Join us again.